Enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and engaging conversations as they happen. I am very pleased to be in the company of Dr. Bruce Kingsbury, the Director of Environmental Resource Center and a Professor of Biology at Purdue Fort Wayne. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So the first thing that, question that everybody probably asks you is, how did you become a scientist and what made you draw you to biology and then obviously your specific field of study?
I was always fascinated by the out of doors, by nature and wildlife, and found an early attraction to snakes and turtles and things like that. A lot of creatures that I think make some people uncomfortable for some reason. And so I just continue to pursue that and just spend a lot of time outside looking for critters and bringing some home and just enjoying being out there by myself in the woods or fields. And so
you specialize in reptiles, correct?
Yeah, that would be one of my hats, as I put it.
Okay, and so just in case everybody was sleeping during basic biology, so a reptile is so that's okay. So I'm going to see if I remember this. Is that it's a warm-blooded or cold-blooded animal?
Well, we would call it an ectotherm.
Oh, right.
It relies on heat from outside of its body.
Okay. And does it lay eggs or, yes?
Sometimes and sometimes not.
Okay. And what else defines a reptile?
Well, they have a different kind of scale from like a fish scale. So amphibians don't have scales, and then reptiles do. They've also, a hallmark that you wouldn't see is the egg that they lay is very different from an amphibian or a fish egg, kind of like a chicken egg. Those are sort of some of the most fundamental things, but people look at them and their skin is dry and they have scales and they run around on land instead of in the water.
Right, and aren't they some of the oldest descendants of dinosaurs and stuff that we have?
Well, they're related to dinosaurs, but actually birds and alligators and things like that are more closely related to dinosaurs. But their closest relatives, lizards and snakes, would be closely related.
And then, but you specialize, your real area of focus, because what people don't realize when you become a scientist, it's not like you can just say, oh, you're going to study all kinds of lizards. You'll say, I'm only going to study geckos, or I'm only going to study iguanas. So what are your particular animals of interest?
Well, when I started here, I was able to focus on conservation of reptiles in particular. And so what I focused on were the animals that were in the deepest trouble. So I would say imperiled reptiles would be where I kind of focused as I came here.
And what would be considered imperiled reptiles today?
So it sounds so esoteric, but a federally threatened species is the copperbelly water snake, and I would be the expert on that. And the eastern Massasauga is a little tiny rattlesnake in the Midwest, and that's federally threatened, and I'm one of the experts on that.
Okay.
And then there's some turtles, and then there's the habitats that they live in.
Right, and that probably, the conservation and the habitats and the environment probably is more as your role of the director, right, as the Environmental Resource Center, is that correct?
So the Environmental Resources Center is a derivative of the original Center of Excellence at what was then IPFW, and that was a center that was called the Center for Reptile and Amphibian Conservation and Management, and what that was my effort to not only do research but also do outreach and engagement and really have direct influence on management decisions and things like that. So the ERC is broader and actually the center we had before was broad. But people couldn't relate to something like that in the way they can the ERC. So we concern ourselves with water issues and wildlife and sustainability and that sort of thing. But the element there that you're picking up on is it's not just about research. It's about engaging the community, engaging with agencies that make decisions. So that's the nature of the ERC. But we also still do the research. I still have a research program. We have graduate students and do a lot of research on Massasaugas and various kinds of turtles. So it's a hodgepodge of things, but they're all related to the environment and to sustainability.
So when we think about, so why did you particularly want to put your focus on this copperbelly water snake and the certain type of rattlesnake? What was it that you felt drew them to, or was it that you just sort of went down the list of federally, at risk and said, okay, I'll take these two?
Well, some of it is financial in that the funding to do this kind of work is limited, and if an animal has some degree of threat, there's an obligation then to do something about it. So there's funding. I think the other thing that I'm thinking about on this, though, is if I were truly going to just be doing it simply because I thought it was interesting, I might actually focus on different species. But I did come to the conclusion back when I was a student that really I had an obligation to do something about protecting the wildlife, protecting the habitats. It couldn't be for me just about studying things I thought were interesting. There actually had to be some application that, and I felt some responsibility. If I was going to understand about these organisms, I should actually apply that understanding to help protect them. And if I just watched them disappear, that wasn't going to be very satisfying.
But when most people think about wildlife, and most people think of as biology, the mammals, or you think about the elephants and the pandas and the lions and orca whales and bigger animals that get all the attention and they raise all the money and and they're cute and
we call those charismatic megafauna or the sexy species.
Yeah. So why should we care about? I mean, I'm thinking, and where does this copperbelly water snake? First of all, where does it live? Okay, is it going to be anywhere where I'm swimming?
Well, so you've introduced a few things there. We can talk about your concerns about where you're swimming, but I think you just articulated with your list why I do what I do and where I do it. And a lot of times when we're thinking about conservation, we're thinking about the Serengeti or elephants or the charismatic species.
Yeah, or Jane Goodall.
Sure, sure.
My chimpanzees.
Yeah. So those are all very interesting to me as well, but what I would point out is that we have a lot of problems right here. We don't need to go. We have problems with water, we have problems with loss of habitat, we have species that are in trouble, and not everybody needs to study chimpanzees. In fact, you don't need too many people studying chimpanzees, but we need a lot of other understandings to happen. And so you can have a perfectly fulfilling career looking at these other species, which I think are also interesting, and that lets me engage locally and have a positive influence in our region.
Okay, so I want you to tell me why I should care about let's start with this copperbelly water snake, okay, and why it's important, and then how do you sort of sell it? I mean, I guess to graduate students or, because you have to, so talk me through it.
Well, these are some of the big challenges, and one of the fundamentals to that I would start with is it's my personal feeling that everything here is not here just to benefit us, that other organisms have some level of right to exist, and not the same level as perhaps we might grant ourselves because we're the ones who are largely in control. But I think wildlife and habitats have intrinsic beauty, intrinsic value, and I think that they should be preserved because they exist. And so a lot of people will ask me, well, why should we care? But more fundamentally, what's in it for me? What's in it for people? And I really don't think that things have to have immediate value to humans in order to preserve them.
And isn't that also that basis of homeostasis? Like, we don't really know, like people think, oh, well, if mosquitoes cause malaria, why don't we just eradicate mosquitoes? But obviously, you start, it's like the little fish, from biology, the little fish eats this fish and then the bigger fish.
Sure.
So if we just eradicate something, we don't know how it's going to, it could really impact the ecosystem or the balance, right? So, I mean, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, it's no big deal if this one water snake, right?
Well, certainly things can be complicated, and we don't really understand all of what's complicated about it. And for some species, if you do lose them, you can clearly unravel a lot of things, and the more we study that, the more we learn. On the other hand, there are other species where if they're not there, then maybe it won't matter too much.
That's sort of like, the appendix. Like, we technically don't need it anymore, like from evolutionary standpoint, but we still have it, unless it flares up. So like this copper-bellied water snake. So, there's a big issue when you look about conservation and stuff about invasive species. So does it have a purpose like that? Does it help, with fighting off invasive species, or does it do something that helps, like because of its scales or something, that it helps to filter the water or clean the water? Or
well, so you use the word purpose, which I would say no, that wouldn't have a purpose. The role, I might use the word role, and that it is of interest. That particular species would be of interest because it's what I would call an indicator species. That if you have that snake in the landscape, that means that you have a healthy landscape at some level. And many of the species that I study use wetlands, and if you have something like a copperbelly, not an individual copperbelly, but a population of them in an area, that tells you that there's a lot of wetlands in there that are good, that the corridors between those wetlands are safe. So it's an indication of health.
Right.
And so that's a value that
right.
they
and
have.
People don't realize, like I know, like the indications like of water quality and stuff, or you look at frogs because of how they develop from tadpoles. And then also, you also look at frogs because of the fact that they breathe through their skin. And so if there's a lot of dirt or chemicals in the water, then the frogs can't breathe. Because I think in the last 15 years, I think we've lost like 2,000 species of frogs around the world. Because there's this photographer, about the Noah's Ark project so this gentleman who goes around and he's photographing every animal and species that's in captivity, and he started this 15 years ago, and I think from the time he started to now, we've already lost a lot of the frog species. So when you think about the indicators, and you talked about with wetlands, and why are wetlands so important? And we have a lot of them here, right?
Well, we do, but we used to have a lot more.
Right, which is right. So talk about first, let's understand what is the wetland and why it's important.
So wetlands are an aquatic habitat, different from rivers where the water is moving, or different from something like lakes where the water is deep. And wetlands are shallow and usually small, and oftentimes they dry up. And so people look at them and think they can't be important. In fact, they might not even know that they were there if they visit in the fall. A lot of the really valuable wetlands don't have water. But before they dried up, there was all kinds of wildlife that actually, the adults would go to the water, they'd lay their eggs, the frogs would develop and leave the wetland, the dragonflies would do the same thing, the fairy shrimp, all of these sorts of organisms. And they are designed to actually tolerate the fact that the wetland dries out.
But the wetland intentionally dries. I mean, it's sort of like the cycle, right?
Right.
Because it gets from it gets in the winter, all the snow and the melts, and then it gets the water, and then from all the rain, and
Yep.
then it's sort of very fertile in the spring and summer, and then it starts to die, right, and decay in the fall, right? Mm-hmm. So it has a life cycle.
Right. So these animals are adapted to that.
Okay.
And migratory waterfowl use them. A whole host of plants and animals are reliant on them. And if you don't have the wetlands, you don't have all of those organisms. Many of our species can't exist in a pond. They aren't tolerant of something like fish in the water. And if the water quality is diminished, then what you'll see with them is also diminished. So they have a very important role, and we've lost a lot of that functionality in our landscape. We've lost almost all of wetlands. We see wetlands around, but actually, in fact, by some estimations, a quarter of Indiana was affiliated with wetlands in some way over time. We had the Black Swamp, Kankakee Marsh, lots of these magnificent large areas that used to be wetland that are no longer wetlands. And then we have a lot of these wetlands that are in the forest, and there are still some there, but far fewer than there used to be.
Isn't it because also if you think about wetlands, because they dry out and stuff, so that land is easier to develop for our purposes, like to make housing or
Right.
things, or to create a city, as opposed to like swampland or when you have to dredge it out. And so it's sort of easy for us to encroach on it in terms of my first failed lesson of conservation, that it's not just about us. But so that's probably part of it. But then don't we also can't we make wetlands? Like, can't we just sort of put them in, like if we're going to take it over here, we put it over there?
Well, is a bit of a supposition that can get us in trouble, because a lot of in the word of the day could be it's complicated.
Right.
And that a fundamental aspect of a wetland is that it has water in it, and we can make a basin and we can put water in there, but what we have trouble with is all the complexities that have taken eons to develop, and it's not as simple as just putting water in the bathtub. So part of it is that if we destroy those wetlands, it is difficult for us to replicate the functionality of them by putting others, and that's actually a major challenge. They are frequently accessible, though, that I would include, say swamps and marshes and all those as kinds of wetlands, and a lot of those are, you can drain them with a ditch. You can drain many of them with field tiles with pipe that's in agricultural fields,
Right.
and so they are vulnerable. And most of the ones that we could get rid of, we've gotten rid of.
Okay. And then there was recently, I think it was last 3 years ago or 2 years ago, there was more legislation passed that was not protecting the wetlands. So if you said that Indiana had such a significant wetland, but let's just say, for purposes of this, let's just look at Allen County and Fort Wayne. So what percentage of the wetlands do we have left or have, and then what has been the measurable impact of what we have lost?
So we only have a few percent of the wetlands that we used to, and actually Allen County historically had a lot of wetlands, and so that loss is substantial. And some of these losses matter when it comes to wildlife and that kind of thing. We've talked about that, but I think one of the things that is lost that I spoke on with this legislation was there are in fact impacts to humanity that even if you don't care about copperbelly water snakes or Blanding's turtles or leopard frogs, et cetera, that you should be concerned about what was happening with wetlands. One of them is the storage of water. And what we have gotten very good at is making water somebody else's problem. So what we do is we send it downstream. Well, if you get rid of all of the bathtubs that are farther upstreams, and you deliver the water into the headwaters, and those go into other streams, and eventually they end up in the St. Mary's River, the St. Joe River, the Maumee River.
And those all flow down to what lake do they?
Down to Lake Erie at Toledo.
Okay.
But before they do that, they go through Fort Wayne. And so a consequence of removing protections of wetlands is that you increase the chance of flooding in Fort Wayne, because the water has to go somewhere, and the water doesn't just immediately drain to Toledo, it goes through Fort Wayne. And so there are impacts in terms of that. Also, there's the sediment load, the agrochemicals, all that sort of thing that weren't filtered in the wetlands and that are just delivered to the streams. And that all comes down, and that actually we have to deal with that when we prepare our city water supply, when we're trying to prevent sedimentation of our streams. It's just going to alter the stream channel. Right. So there's a lot of impacts like that. And so just from an anthropocentric perspective, there are plenty of reasons to try to protect wetlands. So we're losing out on that, even if you don't care about all of the ecosystem function, wildlife, and any of that sort of stuff.
Right, but you also have to think about, then you also need like the riverbeds and all of those, I'm better at Florida, because like the mangroves, where they can sort of filter out some of the debris and garbage, right, from the water. Or also you want, like a lot of times there, because we have so much salt water, but those make it like brackish water, so it's not as salty in certain areas. Mm-hmm. Or so, I think that we don't realize that, but if we really could say, if we really look at, and we've seen significantly around the world and even in our own country, this issue with water and the idea of fresh water. So what we typically in Fort Wayne get our water from the Maumee River, is that correct?
Well, it's from the St. Joe.
The St. Joe River, okay. And so, but Fort Wayne is known to have such great water, and we don't, I think that it's not as heavily treated, like I can tell you, as the water in like Miami. That water is just treated, with everything. So, so people would think, and they, I think it's interesting also when you talk about the flooding with Fort Wayne, because obviously that's been a very big history of Fort Wayne, and why, I find it amazing when I came here is that this is the only place that you wouldn't know that there are 3 rivers running through your downtown. I understand everywhere I've lived, I understand waterfront property regardless. Sure. So it was really just something that everybody was walled off for. You couldn't even see the downtown,
we've basically
the rivers.
Turned away from our rivers.
Right, and now we're trying, and then because also the big fallacy is people think that because they're brown, that they're dirty, but that's not true, because it's the sediment, right?
Right, well, it depends on what you call dirty, but
well, I meant like it's not like the rolling brook with the rock, like I see in Vermont.
Sure.
The crystal clear water.
Right. We have the clay soils, and it's browner than it has been historically. But we live in an area where there's clay soils, and there naturally would be some sediment. When it hasn't been raining very much, if you go down and look in the rivers, you can actually see the bottom. So there is an issue with the reason the water is brown is because the sediment is coming off of from farmlands and that kind of thing. But the distinction would be that doesn't necessarily mean it's dangerous. So you can have sediment in a stream and not have E. coli or fertilizer and things like that. So there's different kinds of issues with respect to water quality. We're not in an area like that has limestone or something like that, where you'd have nice clear water, or sandy soils like you have in Michigan.
Right, and those serve as like almost a filter. Like we don't have a natural filter.
Right, or at least the other element of that is that they don't contribute a lot of small particles because it's stone. But that also brings us back to the wetlands, because they do a wonderful job as filters of all of these things we were just discussing. And what happens with them is the water drains down instead of out and down the stream. It actually goes first through the ground, and so a lot of the materials are taken out by the plants that live in the wetlands, and then it's filtered through the ground. And so the quality of the water that was in the wetland is much higher than if you just put it in the stream. And
so when you think about this, and it's all, sort of like, got to start up, it all goes downstream. And I mean, this is like a big problem. I mean, and then we've got, and obviously, then we've got the whole thing with global warming, and regardless if you believe it or not, but you can see it just with the increase in the weather patterns, and now, even at the climate accord. And
the analogy of downstream is a good one, because we're all downstream.
Right, we just keep pushing it further down, right?
But I think if we imagine that we are on the high ground, nobody's on the high ground.
Right.
So I think we have to address these issues because they affect us directly.
And I think also, I was reading that in some parts of Africa, this is the first time that there are man-made humanitarian crises of food and water, that they were not, typically it's normally because of Mother Nature and they don't have enough rain or whatever, and they have drought, and then they, that causes it. But actually now it's impact due to our impact on the environment and nature and stuff that is causing these humanitarian crises. So we don't even realize.
Well, what people don't even realize is how that's happening right here. You might hear about glaciers melting, which they are. I mean, there's lots of pictures where you can compare looking back in time, and they're gone.
Or even the Colorado River now. I mean, there are parts of it that it is just dry.
Yeah, but what that introduces, something like the Colorado River, would be the extremes that are caused by that, and that's an example of what we witness here, is that we happen to live in an area that won't get particularly warmer. I mean, we hear about global warming as part of climate change, but what's definitely true is that the storms we get are stronger, the rain comes more concentrated, and if you have so they're more damaging, they're more dangerous, they cause more of the runoff that we were just talking about, and that's happening right here in Fort Wayne.
And then isn't there also an impact if we don't, it seems to me that it doesn't seem like we're getting as much snow, or it's not, like think about this month, right? So, I don't feel like we had fall. We didn't have like that time where the air sort of changes and it's crisp. But then like this week, we had one day it was already 60 again, and now it's.
Fort Wayne's notorious for just skipping seasons.
Right, but I think that's true.
But I think you are correct that there is less snowfall, but when so that's a warming sort of a pattern, and that you've mentioned invasives before. We are getting more invasives in Indiana, because it's a warmer place.
Well, we also have that pear tree. Isn't that one of the invasives?
Yeah. So that wouldn't be related to climate change. But
no, that's just like what we talked about that somebody introduces. But there's also that one fish that's they're trying to stop it from getting into the lake there, because it eats everything.
So the pear, one of the names of that pear is calorie pear, and that's an ornamental. That it was very popular because of its utility.
So people would use it to landscape their homes.
Right, and then the problem there is then it gets away, so to speak, out into the wild.
It creeps.
It creeps out and or runs. It's so invasive. And then the other thing you mentioned is there are several species of Asiatic carp.
Right. Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So and that's. Those carp are just some of the more obvious things.
Right.
There's diseases and all kinds of other things. Some of them are in the Great Lakes, so we don't want them to get into the Mississippi. Some of them are in the Mississippi, and we don't want them to get into the Great Lakes.
And then there's also, all of these have these mysterious names, like your copper, water belly, and then the Asian carp. But even they were talking about, if people who have a goldfish and they don't want it anymore, or they put it like in a, those, I mean, they get, koi traditionally do grow, but these goldfish can grow into the size of like footballs and survive. I mean, so I mean, it's unbelievable, the whole process, and everywhere, you sort of look at it, everywhere on the spectrum of this, there is significant problem and issues. So in and you sort of are, in some ways, I think, with you dealing with, I'm making fun of your copper belly water snake, and the reptiles, and you're sort of like Chicken Little, like the sky is falling, because like I said, when people don't realize, if you really want to know about the quality of your water, you look at your frogs, and and like when we even looked at the issues with the honeybees, and why that was. So you're sort of there at the cusp saying the sky is falling, and everybody's sort of laughing at you, not intentionally, but.
Well, you're reminding me of so the Environmental Resources Center has a regular program. It was annual until the pandemic, and it's relatively new, but we called it the Conservation Conversation. And the last time I presented in that, I had my title was "The Sky is Falling," and as I began my talk, I actually changed the title slightly, and I italicized "is," because it is. And so that at first I was just doing the word game, but actually things are bad, and they're going to get worse, and we should be doing something about it.
And so it's not just So when you look at the environment and conservation, and so if we lay it all out, we've got land, and then we've got animals, and I'll put all of everybody there, and then we've got water, right? And then we've got the atmosphere. Okay, so it's like sort of like, where do you start, and what do we do? Because then you could get overwhelmed. Because
right, and that is a phenomenon that some of my staff was naming, which is called conservation depression. And it is overwhelming. There are a lot of different things happening simultaneously. And the question could be, where do we start?
Right.
But the answer might be, there's lots of different things that we need to start on. We definitely have some substantial crises in terms of things like carbon dioxide and methane and that sort of thing building up. We have issues with plastics. We lack the will to do to act. We're very short-sighted in how we approach things.
And then, regardless, so if you want to take off the table the debate of global warming or not, but you can actually take this issue of the pandemic as an environmental issue, because of the fact that, like I sort of believe that we're going to find cures to all of today's sort of diseases, but it's all of these bacteria and viruses like E. coli and salmonella and COVID that can replicate and duplicate and change and mutate, that are going to get us all. Because when you look at like Ebola, and you look at even E. coli kinds of things, and it's certainly with the pandemic. And so what people don't realize, it's not just like, because the water quality, but it's also because of the stress that we're putting on the environment. So you have certain animals, like, when they were talking about in the wet market with the pangolin and the bat, because they were stacked, I guess. But the truth is, in the real world, they would never have come in contact with each other. So, whoever is in the environment where the bat lives, they've sort of built up their immune system, so if they get bit by the bat. But if you start encroaching on their environment, and you start having, let's say, because that's why they were saying, like, in certain cases, that if gorillas or something could get the pandemic, they're not traditionally in environments where bats are, I don't think, right? Or,
well, there would be different bats,
okay. But I'm saying that people don't realize that it's the stress that we're also putting, and when you start putting these different animals or species together, and then they don't build up the immune system, and then they get bit, and then because
so you're talking about a couple of different things.
I'm talking about the doom and gloom, basically.
Well, and so another thing to talk about is hope, but you talk about cumulative impacts. All of these things are happening, and it's just like the impact of, say, atrazine on us. If we don't pay attention to all of the different chemicals at the same time, what we're missing is the fact that it's not just one thing at a time, it's many things. And the other thing you're pointing out is that we are moving towards a global ecology where we're mixing, and we haven't seen these things before, and so we have all kinds of diseases, and actually there's diseases affecting snakes. The snakes that we've talked about are being impacted by disease, the frogs, the salamanders.
Well, there was also, I mean, they were doing on a science story that there were these horses that they had, and they let them in a pasture that was under a tree that was an invasive tree or something, and there was something that then the seed that fell from the tree, and then the horses were eating it, and therefore then they were getting sick, and then they were passing it to the cow. I mean, and you don't think about these things, that it's just because they let them graze in this field. And, you know, just like there are people like you that study sort of the health of species, there are people that, like, they're like forensic biology, like they try to figure out, or even with the COVID, they're trying to figure it out. And so, I mean, I sort of just feel like, I mean, I'm sort of being a little tongue-in-cheek about all this, but I sort of feel like that Mother Nature is just really pissed off. I mean, she has had it. You know, she's saying, you are not taking care of my world. I tried it this way. You know, I tried to, you know, first give you, like, even think about the fires, right? You sort of joke, like, you know, where's Smokey the Bear? You know, don't start forest fires. You know, we've tried all these things, and now I think that at this point it's, you know, do you think that, so you talked about hope. Do you think that it's hopeless? Or do you, and what do you think, where do you think, do you think it's with the next generation? Is it, are you seeing it with kids, and or in your, are you seeing more also from a standpoint of a professor and trying to get students to study? And of course, everybody looks at, okay, what, you know, we're in a society now, what kind of job can I get and what kind of money? And I would think that people who choose to study very important frogs may not, you know.
We're not doing it for the money.
Right. So, I mean, so how's that going? I mean, is there more of an interest? Are we generating that?
I think so. The pendulum swings back and forth on many of these things, and the last time we had a really strong interest in these things was in the 60s and the 70s, and I think the pendulum has swung the other way, but is starting to come back, and the younger people, I think, are a little more interested in that than millennials and older adults, and so there is some hope there. Another element of generating hope is to have that in mind when having a conversation about things, is what can be done. But we really are borrowing, we are stealing from our children and our children's children presently, and we're not taking responsibility for our own actions.
Right, and I sort of feel, you know, with all of these, you know, I think it's amazing with all of these privatized space, and, you know, everybody's talking about going to Mars, and now, you know, they were just talking about there's a very specific the south side of corner of the moon that everybody is talking about, that, you know, because, like, they were saying that no country can own Antarctica. That was an agreement that was made. And so now the issue is like, who's going to get to the moon first? Is that going to be an agreement, or is it going to be? And I just sort of feel like we're sort of like, okay, we've messed up this, you know, sort of, you know, so we're moving. We're going to go to a new planet.
Well, so you remind me of Neil deGrasse Tyson came. And
he's amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, he's the director, and he's actually an astronomist at the Natural History Museum in New York City. Yeah, he's like made astronomy hip and cool. Yeah.
Right. So he was asked a question when he presented at the omnibus lecture at the university about travel to Mars and that sort of thing, and what he asked, which I think was an excellent thing, is why are we trying so hard to figure out if we can go somewhere else? There's absolutely nothing about Mars that is anywhere near what we have here. we're like in paradise,
Right.
relatively speaking here. Why would you want to go live in a place where if you went outside you would be dead? And why not spend all of that intellectual capital and real money fixing where we live,
Right.
the house we're in now?
Right.
And of course, there's a lot of great arguments for trying to figure out how to get to Mars and that kind of thing. But really, what we should be doing is figuring out how to fix what we've
Right.
got.
So it's instead of this constant manifest destiny, we should really be thinking about our own backyard. So,
Yeah.
and for a lot of people, you know, like you said, like when we think about water or droughts or starvation, we think about it in other places. And so you were saying that there are things that are happening here. So in terms of what are the most important things that we who live in Fort Wayne and Allen County, we should be thinking about, and it may even be from a political standpoint, like really looking at our candidates to see, you know, for Allen County with the land about how much they're going to allocate or where they're going to allow development in wetlands, or I don't know. I mean, and obviously, you know, recycling and stuff. So what are the things that you think that we could do that would have, and they may be the smallest things, but could have the biggest impact? Because if we just say we have to do everything, that's not going to be realistic. And as I said, I just think, you know, at some point I just, like you said, it's that conservation, I just throw my hands up and be like, this is just terrible. What are some of those things?
So there might be two ways of answering that. One would be regionally, and what can we regionally do, like the think globally, act locally. And I think water quality is an issue that is front and center for us now. We do want to work on maintaining water quality everywhere at a nice level. That relates these days to the rivers. We've finally, in the last decade or so, turned our attention towards the rivers instead of away from them. In terms of wildlife and that sort of thing, we definitely have a limited amount of relatively natural habitat, and so I think we need to work on protecting what we have left. And I think we're entering a period where we're going to have to be a little more careful about waste. We've been kind of cavalier in the United States and in a place like Indiana. You can just go put it over there in that farm field, dig a hole and go put it there. But really, if you look at Europe, I like to suggest to people to look at what Europe is doing, because Europe has had to face these problems for far longer than we have. So they're figuring out solutions. And if we're smart, we should not try to reinvent the wheel or wait. We could actually look in there. But that's sort of a segue too into what can we do ourselves. And I think that has to do with being wiser about energy use and the waste that we generate from that. I think plastics is just starting to emerge. The awareness of plastics is beginning to emerge. That's a big thing, and so it comes down to personal decisions about personal decisions, but also holding businesses accountable, because a lot of the waste, a lot of the energy, the use, et cetera, is actually outside of the home and actually in the business sector.
And I think also holding our public officials, because yes, I have this whole issue about, so when you think about electric works, okay, so I think about the fact that at the time when General Electric was building this factory and everything, there should have been a fund or something from the day that they came here that they have to put money in for the day that they leave. Because there's another big factory that starts with a T that's in Southeast. I don't know the name of it. And it's like just deserted. And I think, like, where is the corporate responsibility that when you decide you're leaving and, you know, you're no longer going to be here and you're not taking the buildings and everything with you, that you just leave it? And so it's just rusted, and what the damage that it's done to our, the neighborhoods, and in terms of you look at people's, and then it creates these deserts, and I'm like, why? Where is that corporate responsibility? So although I think it's wonderful that finally we are doing something with this, but why did it sit there and create this eyesore and division and everything? Why aren't we thinking that way?
Well, so what you introduced there is the notion of paying the full freight.
Right. It's sort of like
the true cost.
Right. It's sort of like when people say to you, I think that a lot of people, they focus on the wedding and not the marriage. And although at the beginning of the marriage, you should also think about the divorce, because inevitably that 50% involved. So I think it's the same thing. Like, we all think it's so wonderful that we get these companies and factories, to our towns and cities. But I think at that same time, we shouldn't just be thinking about the wedding. We think about the marriage, but we also have to think about in 50 years when it's no longer going to be here, or the relatives. And we know historically that this is what happens, and it's happened in cities all over the country.
So you can look at factories, you can look at mines, you can they're
coal mines, and then also and
there have
fracking,
been,
right? Same thing.
Right. So fracking is still new enough that I don't think that's a factor. But
except for the amount of water that takes, but that's also affecting the plates, the shifting of, right? So
what I would say that's something that you can hold in your hand, it would be, if you look at a child's toy in a wrapper on the shelf, and if you look at that in one of our stores and you compare that to a store that you see, say, in Europe, you might have the same toy, but the wrapper in our wrapper is much larger and their wrapper is much smaller. And what the difference in accountability is, in their case, you have to pay the true cost of the item, and the true cost of the item is what was how much did it cost to mine it, what was the degradation that you caused. Then there's actually the manufacturing cost, and then there's the cost when you get rid of it.
For them to have to take it away and haul it. And
So I want to be more optimistic about marriage, but I definitely know we throw a lot of stuff away. And so you have to do something with that. So actually you can figure that out. And so when you sell the product to somebody, you have to pay. Well, if you make the packaging smaller, it didn't cost as much to make. It's not going to cost as much to throw it away. You get the person gets the same item. Well, we don't care about that. Whether it's the wetland legislation or the way we handle trash, we basically distribute the true cost of items out into the future generations.
Which is the whole idea of just sending it downstream.
Yeah, where we just keep on kicking the can down the road, and we shouldn't do that.
Okay, so what are the 3 things that I can go home now and at least feel that I'm not going to have my conservation depression and I'll be able to do something for the environment? What are 3 things that I could do right now to help? Let's just stick with Fort Wayne, Allen County.
Well, so energy-wise, we could actively consume less energy. Some of that's as simple as turning the thermostat down a little bit, or
not taking baths.
Well, I don't know. As long as I get to take showers.
Right. Well, no, that's okay. But baths, right? The amount of water, right? Okay. So
as long as you have the right kind of shower head on there.
Right. So okay.
But it's. I mean, there's a list, and I'll try to make it 3. But a lot of them has to do with using less and be satisfied. And people don't think about even recycling. I like to get people to think about something like recycling, and they might think, oh, I do or I don't. But I think a lot of people's decisions are based on risk and convenience. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do is nudge people to actually allow themselves to be inconvenienced momentarily, and it's just momentarily, and then put it in the recycling bin instead of in the trash. If you can compost, and that means that stuff goes back into contributing to the health of the soil instead of into a landfill, where Perhaps it will contribute to soil quality in 10,000 years, but not anytime soon.
Right.
And a lot of the plastics and such are recyclable. We don't do a very good job at recycling, and we actually need to be more accountable in terms of actually truly recycling these things, or finding materials that can be recycled and not using materials that aren't recyclable.
Those are three.
So energy, waste, and
Being a little inconvenience for
right, and a lot of
right.
it it's just a little bit more.
Right.
Just because the recycling bin is over there, you can walk over there and do it there. And we have so many items that are single use. I'm a conservation biologist, and I'm very aware of the fact that I could do a better job. I think none of us live sustainably. We just have to try to live more sustainably. And if you are buying things that you're just throwing away that are bulky, that means that the earth was disturbed to make those things. The landfill is going to get fuller because of those things are there. And do you really need those things? And could you have gotten it in a compostable container? Which reminds me too, in many cases, a little container that is compostable, maybe it actually will go in the landfill, but you have supported an industry that makes compostable things. And as we move into the future and try to be more responsible, we've jump-started that. And that would be a profound, I look at the amount of trash that many people generate every week that goes out onto the curb. It's astounding. And if we could slow that down, that would be good.
Okay. Well, I think this is a good start, but I think we have a lot more to talk about, and we'll have to continue our conversation.
All right.
I'm not sure if you've remedied my conservation depression at all, but at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized for a Victorian parlor game. What is your favorite word?
Okay, so thinking about that, I've thought of beauty.
Okay. What is your least favorite word?
Wow, my least favorite word. Well, okay, a phrase that comes to mind is "and such."
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Anything that causes some resonance or dissonance for me. I think of art that way. That something is art when it causes some response from your brain that's not just an intellectual kind of response. And I relate that actually to beauty as well, and how we have to preserve things that we think are beautiful.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Redundancy, complacency.
What sound or noise do you love?
I've listening to music lately that has a lot of some more of this sort of primitive brain sort of thing. It's like a Radiohead is a group that I've listened to that appeals to me in some kind of subconscious
Like a visceral way.
Yeah.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The screeching on a chalkboard.
I would have thought it was the garbage truck, you know. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Very interested in landscaping. I've always thought that carpentry and construction were very interesting, and I could imagine being a professional artist, although I think it's financially a little too challenging for me.
Although that could be argued with being a professor.
That's true. Apparently, I'm not too careful about
right.
that.
What profession would you not like to do?
I've always thought I didn't want to do sales, and I didn't want to be a politician. Although I've come to realize that politics are in absolutely everything.
And you are also in sales because you're selling.
Right.
Right. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Some of the outreach material that I've done, there's a book, a habitat management guide, that is the thing that I'm proudest of, and I'd say the ERC itself is another point of pride for me.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Barack Obama.
How would you like to die?
In my sleep.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome.
Well, I want to thank Bruce Kingsbury, the director of the Environmental Resources Center at Purdue Fort Wayne, for having a seat at our table. And I'd like to invite you to come back maybe on a quarterly basis for us to continue to have a conversation and really look at these things and sort of maybe break them down a little bit more.
Dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so I really would like to encourage you, and we will make that happen.
Right, good.
And you can learn more about And Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at andgoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company. There you go.